thank you to all of the organizers and to everyone at the COGIT and Media Services. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll be talking about progress today. My slideshow, I apologize, is a bit basic. It mainly tracks the main ideas from my talk, and I designed it that way because honestly, when I've been to conferences, my ears and brain sometimes have trouble keeping up with the pace of the speaker. So if you're like me and auditory comprehension is a growth edge for you, then hopefully these slides will be helpful. Okay. Move to my introduction. So why talk about progress at all? I want to take this suggestion seriously. Why bother resurrecting a concept that one might say is merely a relic of the Enlightenment? We might initially say that progress is just the illusion of the unfolding of human improvement. At its best, belief in progress gives us hope, unfounded, naive hope, but hope nonetheless, for a better future. But at its worst, belief in progress is complicit with the forces of neoliberalism, fascism, and empire. It pulls the wool over our eyes, reassuring us that things are getting better, while the reality is anything but. We could draw on various thinkers to inform such a skeptical attitude, from Baldwin, who posed the famous question, how much time do you want for your progress, to Du Bois, who wrote that progress is necessarily ugly. Or we could look to the contemporary field of diverse strands of anti-capitalism, anti-consumerism, and degrowth in the context of COVID-19 giving us an opportunity for a political course correction. Agroecologist Thomas Falkowski writes, quote, how tragic would it be if the world as we know it remained on its slouching course toward a broken normal? We might have reason to suspect that progress is just cover for the maintenance of this broken normal, this continuing hegemony of a racial capitalist genre of humanity. If we look at the history of the concept of progress, we might find more reasons for abandoning it. Though it originally carried the simple and concrete spatial meaning of stepping forward or moving forward through space, the term's common usage grew more abstract during the 18th century. As historiographer Reinhard Koselleck showed in his essay on the concept, progress, quote, neatly and deftly brought the manifold of scientific, technological, and industrial meanings of progress, and finally also those meanings involving social morality and even the totality of history under a common concept, end quote. Progress thus became universal in scope, pertaining to everything in history and morality. In fact, Koselleck notes that in German, the concepts of history and progress, die Geschichte and Fortschritt, emerged simultaneously, which he calls a premise for his entire inquiry. In sum, we might want to abandon progress because it conveys the perpetual universalization of manifold components of European Enlightenment, and therefore, in Amy Allen's words, remains committed to an imperialist meta-narrative. The history of the concept progress shows that progress is metonymic for the fact that our world's slouching course toward a broken normal runs deep, at least to the 18th century, if not well beyond. But strangely, progress has resurfaced recently as a topic of interest among political theorists. Contemporary thinkers seeking to revive the concept have presented it as a useful one for moving beyond the broken normal and for imagining outside the imperialist meta-narrative. In this presentation, I'll first review the reconstructed version of progress that has been put forward by contemporary thinkers, and then I'll introduce my own intervention. To summarize at the outset, I find the reconstruction of progress useful insofar as it goes some distance toward foregrounding agency, critiquing Enlightenment inheritances, and allowing agents to selectively cast certain historical moments as politically inspirational. I then point to a lingering problem with progress discourse, which is its constitutive risk of devaluing the present, and suggest how complementing progress with a concept I call dilation might begin to address this. So section one. First, a quick summary of the contemporary reconstruction of progress. I've already talked a little bit about the original conception, which Koselleck describes, but Jacob Huber, in his recent work, characterizes the shift from that Enlightenment conception of progress to the contemporary reconstruction of it as the stripping away of metaphysical, teleological, and deterministic aspects. Unlike 18th century thinkers, contemporary thinkers have broadly held that history has no determined endpoint or telos, such as a worldwide communist association or liberal society of states, and that there is no metaphysical spirit in the machine of history pulling its strings from the inside. What happens is not determined, but is contingent upon the agency of human and non-human agents. Progress, then, is generally figured as, quote, a collective learning process that occurs as we work out how to live together. For contemporary thinkers, according to Huber, progress emphasizes the necessity of critique and political action for collectively determining a contingent and undecided future. There is a resonance here with the arguments of various theorists of democracy that political agents must go back to the rough ground of conflict, contestation, persuasion, and textured human relationality, instead of appealing to timeless principles or foundational moments. Just as there is no metaphysical power or entity that can guarantee progress, so too is there no enshrined higher ideal, law, or rational consensus to which we can appeal for democratic decision-making. The prospects for progress all depend on how we, as social and political beings, act in concert. So far, so good. The foregrounding of agency as the only way to produce a desirable future casts progress as hortatory or motivational more than descriptive. Instead of casting progress as an inevitable consequence of history or reason or God, we come to view progress as at risk of failure, and therefore as in need of our efforts to sustain it. However, there are three other points I want to make here. The first point concerns the naturalistic characterization of humanity, discussed most prominently by Amy Allen. The second related point concerns Allen's discussion of decolonizing progress. And the third and final point concerns Huber's parsing of progress as hope. First, Allen describes various critical theorists, chiefly Habermas and Hanneth, as subscribing to a view of political life as an ongoing historical learning process. That's a quote, historical learning process that undergirds their normative arguments. Political change, in their view, according to Allen, takes the form of an ongoing story about how we have been in a civilizational development process that has led to us, and that informs our normative views concerning where we should go from here. This bears some similarity to the views of pragmatist and naturalist philosophers who have developed theories of collective moral learning. Allen points out that this naturalistic view is vulnerable to critiques from post-colonial thought. I'll return to that point shortly, but I want to suggest here, following Walter Benjamin, that there might be a danger to this kind of ascription of continuity to history. To say that history is a continuous collective learning process is to enmesh human agents in a process that exceeds our lifetimes and transcends our actions, and thereby risks reinscribing determinism and narrowing the space for imagination and agency. Benjamin's invocation of historical moments as punctuating strands or sparks in his metaphors, in my view, provides a more emancipatory set of ways for thinking of the relation of agents to history, a point that I will leave here for now. Second, Allen has pointed out that any reconstructed concept of progress must face up to post-colonial interventions. For example, she argues that in his theoretical system, Hanneth wants to avoid both pure contextualism and pure Kantian universal normativity, and that he, quote, splits the difference by telling a thoroughly immanent story about the, quote, historical developmental superiority of our own ethical form of life. Hanneth wants neither to establish self-standing normative principles nor to retreat to the view that normativity can only ever be locally situated. And he solves this problem by grounding normativity in the imminent unfolding of Western society. The progress that we have achieved in the past and into the present provides justificatory grounds for our making normative claims concerning the future. The problem, of course, is that this commits him to viewing European modernity as more advanced than and developmentally superior to non-European or non-modern forms of life. In other words, a commitment to progress in the sense of an ongoing story about Western society's historical learning process is unhelpful for undoing various aspects of colonial domination. In response to this predicament, Allen advises that we, quote, would be better off without Honneth's vindicatory sense of progress, and that instead we ought to continually critique our own Western inheritances in a practice that she calls problematizing genealogy. In this practice, we would face up to the entanglements of the Enlightenment project in the coloniality of power. I think this is a good start, but insofar as it casts the Enlightenment project into the future as a cohesive and self-identical, if violently and pervasively colonial and racist form of life, I want to at least hesitate. Again, this is because I want to express dissatisfaction with conceptions of progress that remain attached to a meta-historical narrative of continuity. Here, for the specific reason that it risks reifying Western society or inheritors of the Enlightenment project as a historically continuous and self-identical entity, a reification that we might be better off avoiding. Third, progress has been presented by Jacob Huber as emphasizing not the backward-looking dimension of problematizing genealogy, but the forward-looking dimension of what he calls practical hope. Huber writes that humans are fundamentally future-oriented in the sense that we live and act under an idea of what lies ahead of us. If the world were inhospitable to our agency, he argues, then we would despair and not act at all. And therefore, practical hope for progress is an inextricable part of the way that we imagine, think, and act. We simply cannot do without it. He therefore calls us to, quote, imaginatively inhabit the desired future by actively mapping in the imagination mental pathways to the desired outcome. Huber does not give us political examples to illustrate his point, but one example he does give compares the soccer fan who thinks his team will have a poor season and sinks into pessimism to the fan who also thinks his team will have a poor season, but who is able to imagine how a better outcome might, in principle, be possible. Maybe the injured star player will recover. Maybe the team will make a surprise trade, or maybe the rookie players will have a breakthrough year. This second fan has practical hope. Now, I can imagine how this reframing from backward-looking problematization to forward-looking practical hope might be helpful. And for a more political example, we could take the case of police abolition. While many of us imagine a society without policing, we can only get there by starting somewhere. And imagination as a component of practical hope can be helpful for working towards such a goal. Decreasing funding to police departments, reducing the number of vehicles in departmental fleets, and redirecting emergency calls away from policing units can be part of such a map to the desired outcome. I think this kind of emphasis on the forward-looking dimension of practical hope that asks, what can I or we do to bring about our desired outcome is indispensable. But I also find that in almost all the literature on progress, there is a focus on the backward-looking and forward-looking dimensions and relatively little attention paid to the present. I want to close by turning to this dimension of time, which I feel is often missed in conversations about progress. So, section 2. In this final section, I want to develop the idea that progress, as it has been reconstructed in recent works of political theory, emphasizes either the problematizing of the past or a practical hope concerning the future, while de-emphasizing the present. In contrast, I want to suggest that a renewed attachment of focus to the present, or to borrow a phrase from Robin Marasco, cultivating a relation or a misrelation to the present, could be a useful complement to the backward-looking and forward-looking emphases of the existing reconstruction of progress. Specifically, I want to put forward the concept of dilation as a contrast and complement to progress. By dilation, I mean dwelling in, inhabiting, and extending the present moment by deepening one's attachment to and focus on it. Dilation is associated with a set of habits of mind and political practices of concern for the self and others. I borrow this term from Martin Haglund's recent book, This Life. Haglund uses dilation to refer to, quote, the turn toward what is happening at this very moment, trying to capture life as it unfolds right now. In my reading of Haglund, I take dilation to be a sort of complement to progress, because where progress seeks to move forward through the experience of temporality, dilation seeks to slow down the experience of temporality and to linger in the qualities of particular moments or events. Importantly, dilation does not mean stopping time or preserving a stable moment in time. It is not the same as stagnation or staticity. Rather, dilation yields, quote, a stronger sense of how the present moment is ceasing to be and has to be held in memory as it opens onto a future that exceeds it. Where the discourse of progress, figured as practical hope or problematizing genealogy, pushes us to consider the past and the future, dilation pushes us to consider the present moment and the possible lessons and resources it can offer political practice. I have two examples to consider here. The first takes up again the question of police abolition and the tremendous role towards that goal played by Black Lives Matter movement. In the wake of numerous cases of deadly violence exercised against Black people by police, including, but not limited to, the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and going back to the 2012 murder of Trayvon Martin, the Black Lives Matter movement has brought a number of instances of police violence and loss of Black life under a common banner and allowed them to be seen and grieved in a common light as part of an ongoing and dilated political moment of conflict between forces of white supremacy and policing and forces of racial justice. The experience of dilation is at work in the way in which Black Lives Matter calls us to hold that what happened to Floyd, Taylor, Arbery, Martin, Garner, and too many others is unacceptable, and to carry that knowledge not only in particular moments, such as in the immediate aftermath of an episode of police violence, but all the time. This is how I make sense of the slogan, Black Lives Matter today, tomorrow, and every day after that. The slogan calls on us to not give in to the logic of progress, with its emphasis on moving past what has happened and into the future, but to dwell in the lessons of the long now, even as we sense how the moment of the now is ceasing to be and must be held in memory if its lessons are to be sustained. The second example I want to give concerns the ongoing Nakba or catastrophe in Palestine. Simply framing the Nakba as Nakba does considerable work. It positions what is happening in 2021 in Gaza as part and parcel of the same political moment that began 73 years ago with the dispossession of the Palestinian people. In contrast, much political commentary frames the issue as an iterative outburst of violence. For example, the New York Times has described recent violence and dispossession as another of many, quote, periodic flare-ups of violence in the region. But this framing, by presenting the violence as an acute rather than chronic event, does not achieve the dilation that use of the term Nakba achieves. By continuing to frame the conflict in terms of the Nakba, those defending the rights of Palestinians effectively dilate time, positioning the Palestinian present as a moment that is, in some ways, 73 years old. To be sure, this sense of dilation is different from how Haglund uses it, which has more to do with bestowing deep and detailed attention to everyday life. And yet, in a way, it is actually not that different. To call what is happening now a Nakba is to say that the everyday life of the occupied Palestinian people has, for 73 years, been a catastrophic form of dispossession. And I know I'm running low on time, so this is my final paragraph. To be clear, I don't want to say that dilation is a critique or replacement exactly of the paradigm of progress. Rather, I want to say that the two can be useful complements to one another, and that by extension, the concept of progress remains in some sense incomplete without being complemented by a deep dwelling in and dilating of the present. To be sure, the two sides of progress as it has been reconstructed, practical hope for the future and problematization of the past, can serve rich and generative purposes for critiquing the events that have led up to us and imagining mental pathways to desired futures. But I think they can be augmented by dilating and lingering in the present, sensing the opportunities the present makes available, and deferring or even, at times, refusing the insistence of progress. Deep lingering in the present affords resources both for better understanding our problematic genealogies and for putting hope into practice. Dilation and progress, when interwoven as two components of a repertoire of political practice, give us tools to do three things that are crucial for the formation of any political worldview. First, they allow us to critique aspects of the past that we find problematic or undesirable, and to form value judgments about the historical events and structures that have shaped the world in which we find ourselves. Second, they allow us to look ahead with practical hope and concretely imagine ways to approach more desirable futures. Third, they allow us to vibrantly and deeply inhabit and distend the present moment, to notice its qualities and opportunities, and to find in it resources for political action. Thank you.